The guards didn't just turn her away, they laughed. Zuri Thompson stood at the iron gate of her own home, the home her name was on the deed for, and watched two men in expensive suits smirk at each other while one of them spoke into his earpiece. The rain had already soaked through her coat. Her fingers were pressed flat against her stomach, not because she was cold, though she was, but because of what she was carrying beneath that coat. 8 weeks. She had practiced what she would say for 3 days. Then the guard turned back to her with the expression men use when they've already decided you don't matter. Mr. Kong says you are not to be admitted tonight. If you've ever stood in the rain outside a place that was supposed to be yours and felt the ground shift beneath your feet, drop a comment below with your city and country. Let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now and turn on notifications because this story is only getting started. And you cannot afford to miss what happens next. Hit that like button too, so I can see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling since 6 in the evening. By the time Zuri reached the estate on the eastern edge of the city, it had turned into the kind of rain that doesn't care about umbrellas. It came sideways, it came cold, the kind of rain that feels like a punishment for something you didn't do. She sat in the car for 11 minutes before she got out. She had counted. Zuri was not a woman who counted things, normally. She moved through the world with a kind of deliberate calm that people sometimes mistook for coldness. She was 28 years old and had spent 4 of those years married to a man who ran half of Seoul's criminal infrastructure from behind the polished face of a legitimate real estate empire. She knew what Ji-hoon was. She had always known. She had married him anyway because the version of him that he showed her in those first months, quiet, attentive in the particular way that a man is attentive when he is genuinely frightened of losing something, had convinced her that the man beneath the machine was worth reaching. She'd been trying to reach him for 4 years. She got out of the car. The gate was 15 feet of black iron, solid except for a narrow gap at eye level. She had been through it hundreds of times. The guards on rotation knew her face, knew her car, knew that she didn't carry a bag she hadn't packed herself. She was not the kind of wife who needed to be escorted. She walked up to the gate the way she had walked up to it 100 times before, and the guard on duty, not one of the ones she recognized, someone new, young, with a jaw that hadn't finished deciding what shape it wanted to be, looked at her and then looked away. He said something into his earpiece. He waited. He turned back to her. Mr. Kong says you are not to be admitted tonight. Zuri heard the words. She understood the words. Something in her chest understood them before her brain finished processing them. Because the feeling that moved through her was not confusion. It was something older than confusion. It was the particular weight of a thing you have been dreading for so long that when it finally arrives, it is almost a relief. Almost. I'm his wife, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that later. Yes, ma'am. He said to tell you he'll speak with you in the morning. She looked at the young guard's face. He wasn't smirking. The one beside him was. Not openly, not with his whole face, but there was something at the corners of his mouth that she recognized as the expression men get when they are watching a woman be diminished. He had seen this before. It had happened before. She was not the first woman to stand at this gate in the rain and be told to wait until morning. She didn't move for a moment. She stood in the rain with her hand pressed flat against her stomach, against the inside pocket of her coat where the folded ultrasound image was tucked against her body. And she looked at the gate and thought about all the other nights she had walked through it without thinking about it at all. She turned around and walked back to her car. She didn't cry. She told herself she would wait. She would sit in the car, and she would wait until a light in a window told her something she could use, told her some version of tonight that made sense. She had driven 40 minutes in bad traffic to get here. She had dressed carefully. She had thought about this for 3 days. The coat she was wearing had been a gift from Ji-hoon 2 Christmases ago. She had worn it intentionally. She had thought about that too. She sat in the car for 4 minutes. Then the front door of the estate opened. She saw it through the rain-streaked windshield, which turned the light into a kind of smear, indistinct at first. A woman. Tall, in a red dress that was wrong for the weather, that was expensive in the way that announced itself. She was laughing at something Ji-hoon was saying, her hand at his arm, not gripping but resting there. And Ji-hoon was holding an umbrella over her head, and they were walking together toward the main entrance like 2 people who had been walking together for a long time. Ji-hoon looked good. That was the thing that hit Zuri in a place she hadn't expected. He looked good. He looked the way he looked when he was relaxed, which was rare, which she had cataloged and treasured over 4 years the way you catalog and treasure the rare things. The way his jaw went soft when he wasn't performing authority. The way his shoulders dropped half an inch. The way his hands stopped making decisions and just existed. He looked like that. He looked like the version of himself that she had spent 4 years trying to get back to. He was showing it to someone else. Zuri's hand was still pressed flat against her stomach. She watched him hold the umbrella over the woman in the red dress while the rain soaked into the collar of his own jacket. She watched him tilt his head the way he tilted his head when he was listening, genuinely listening, and she thought with a sudden nauseating clarity that she had not seen him tilt his head that way toward her in at least 8 months. She started the car. She didn't know where she was driving. She drove the way people drive when they need to be moving because the alternative is to sit still and feel the full weight of what just happened. And the full weight of what just happened was more than she was prepared to hold in a car, in the rain, alone, with a folded photograph of an 8-week fetus pressed against her ribs. She drove for 20 minutes before her phone lit up. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. No name, no context, just 6 words in plain text. They know about the clinic. Drive fast. She looked at it. Her first instinct was to call it spam, to feel the brief adrenaline of someone else's phishing attempt and dismiss it. But something in the grammar of it stopped her. They know. Not someone knows. Not be careful. They know. As if the sender was certain of the identity of the people who knew, and that identity was the part she needed to understand immediately. She drove faster. Her second mistake. The first had been coming tonight, or maybe the first had been 3 months ago. Or maybe the first had been the moment she decided to walk into that clinic alone because Ji-hoon had been in a meeting she was not permitted to know about. Her second mistake was not turning around, not driving toward noise, toward people, toward light. She took the highway because the highway was direct, and she was thinking about getting somewhere, not about what might be waiting between here and there. The car died 7 kilometers outside the city, not gradually. Not with warning lights and the polite fiction of a car suggesting you might want to pull over. It died completely. Power steering, engine, the lights on the dashboard, everything. One moment she was doing 90, and the next she was coasting. And then she wasn't coasting. She was stopped, on the side of a highway that was empty. The way highways are empty at 11:30 at night in the rain when the weather has driven everyone sensible inside. She tried the ignition 3 times. Nothing. She looked at her phone. She had 4 bars and then she had none, and the screen showed her a little spinning wheel that didn't stop spinning. The rain was hitting the roof of the car in a way that was almost loud enough to be reassuring, because loud things feel like presence, and presence feels like safety, which is of course wrong, but the body doesn't know that. She saw the light about 30 seconds before she saw the figure. It was a headlamp, not a car. Someone on foot, at the edge of the tree line across the road, moving toward her car with the deliberate pace of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has already decided what they will do when they get there. The person was dressed in black, with something covering their face, and they were not hurrying because they did not need to hurry. Zuri got out of the car from the passenger side. She moved fast and she moved low and she moved into the dark because she had read, somewhere, when she was 16 and still reading things that felt hypothetical, that if someone is coming toward you with intent, you do not want to be where they expect you to be. She went into the ditch, and then up the embankment, and then into the trees on the same side as the road, and not across it, and she moved with the rain covering the sound of her movement, and she did not look back for the first 40 seconds because looking back costs you 40 seconds. When she did look back, there were 2 figures now, not one, both moving to the car and finding it empty, and then one of them turning to scan the tree line with a flashlight. She pressed herself flat against the largest tree she could find. The beam of the flashlight swept the tree line twice. Then she heard one of them speak, too low to make out words but clear enough in tone. He was not panicked, he was adjusting. These were people who had encountered problems before and had adjustments prepared. That was, in its own way, more frightening than panic. Zuri moved deeper into the trees. Her coat was soaked through within 3 minutes. The ground was soft, and her shoes were not made for soft ground. And twice she went down to one knee and had to push back up with her hand against the earth. She was breathing in the careful way she breathed when Ji-hoon's men had guests she wasn't supposed to know about. measured, quiet, deliberate. She kept one hand pressed against the inside of her coat. The ultrasound was still dry. She didn't know why that mattered to her as much as it did. She knew, clinically, that the photograph was not the baby, that the photograph was just paper, that the baby existed in her body and not in that picture. But the picture was the only proof she had that the last 3 months had not been a hallucination, that something real was happening, that her life was not just standing still while Ji-hoon's moved forward without her. She moved through the trees for 22 minutes. She knew it was 22 minutes because she had started counting again, the way she had sat in the car counting minutes outside the gate. And she thought distantly that she was turning into the kind of person who counts things, who measures time in units, because measuring time in units gives you the illusion of control over the thing that is happening to you. She came out of the trees at the edge of a service road she didn't recognize. She stood at the edge of it and looked both directions and saw nothing in either direction except the road and the rain and the dark. She was 6 kilometers from the highway, she thought, maybe 7. Her phone was dead. Her car was disabled and occupied by people who had disabled it deliberately, which meant someone had known her route, which meant someone had known she was going to take the highway tonight, which meant someone had known she was going to the estate, which meant someone had been watching her for at least the last several hours. She thought about the woman in the red dress. She thought about Ji-hoon's hand on the umbrella, the easy set of his shoulders, the way he had tilted his head. She thought about the guard's voice. "Mr. Kong says you are not to be admitted tonight." She thought about the picture inside her coat. Then she stopped thinking about all of it and started walking, because the service road went somewhere, and somewhere was better than here, and she was not going to stand still in the rain on an empty road and wait for the people with the flashlights to find the edge of the trees. She did not know that 12 kilometers away, inside the estate she had been refused entry to, the woman in the red dress had received a text message of her own, and was reading it with an expression that had nothing to do with the laughter she had been performing all evening. She did not know that 3 floors above the entrance hall where Ji-hoon had first stood with that umbrella, in an office that Zuri had been inside exactly once, a man she had never met was sitting in front of 6 surveillance monitors, watching a small blinking dot move slowly along a service road in the rain. She did not know that the dot was her. She walked. The rain kept falling, and somewhere behind her at the car, one of the men in black lifted his phone and said 4 words into it. "She's in the trees." The man on the other end of the line didn't wait for a greeting. "We lost her." 3 words. That was all it took for the temperature inside Ji-hoon's office to drop by 10 degrees. I was standing at the window when the call came through, still in the jacket he'd worn to dinner, his tie loosened but not removed. The woman in the red dress, Seo Yeon, she had called herself, though he had not yet decided if that was her real name, had left 40 minutes ago with a car he'd arranged and a smile he hadn't quite trusted all evening. He had been thinking about that smile. He had been thinking about the fact that she had arrived with a referral from one of his Busan contacts, and that he had not, until 40 minutes ago, thought to verify the referral directly. He turned from the window. "What do you mean, lost her?" His head of security, Park Jun, was a man who had been delivering bad news to dangerous people for 15 years. He knew how to stand when he delivered it. Straight. Hands visible. Eye contact maintained, not because he was challenging anyone, but because breaking eye contact while delivering bad news reads as an attempt to escape the consequence. And Park Jun had learned early that you do not attempt to escape consequences in front of Kang Ji-hoon. She left the highway on foot. The team found her car, but she was already into the tree line. They lost visual at approximately 11:47. Ji-hoon's hand was still holding the phone he'd taken the call on. He set it down on the desk with a precision that, if you didn't know him, looked like calm. She was on the highway. Yes. Why was she on the highway? Jun's jaw moved once before he answered. She left the estate at approximately 10:58. She drove directly to the highway. Ji-hoon looked at him. She came here. Yes, sir. The silence that followed was the particular kind of silence that happens in rooms where men know something bad is being assembled, piece by piece, into a shape they don't want to see fully. Ji-hoon walked to the desk and sat down and picked up the folder that Jun had brought with him. He opened it without looking at Jun's face. Inside was a single photograph, printed from security footage, time-stamped 22:43. It showed Zuri at the gate, the coat he recognized. The angle was from the camera mounted at the top of the left pillar, which meant her face was partly down, and he couldn't fully read her expression, but he could see the way she was standing. He had seen her stand that way before, only twice. Once when her mother was sick and she hadn't told him for 3 weeks, and once when she had tried to talk to him about leaving and he had not had the conversation she needed him to have. She was pressing her right hand flat against her stomach. Ji-hoon stared at that detail for a long time. "Who gave the order to deny her entry?" he said. His voice had a quality to it that June had learned to identify precisely. Not raised, not sharp, but gone of all warmth, the way water goes when the temperature drops, and it becomes something solid and immovable. "You did, sir, this afternoon. You said no visitors this evening, no exceptions." "She is not a visitor." "No, sir." "She is my wife." "Yes, sir." Ji-hoon closed the folder. He pressed his thumb against the edge of the desk. The desk was solid walnut, 2 inches thick, and he pressed his thumb against the edge of it until the pressure was just short of pain, because the pain gave him something specific to feel in a moment when everything else he was feeling was too large and too shapeless to be useful. "Get me the footage from the gate, all of it, her arrival, her wait, her departure, every second." June moved immediately. Ji-hoon opened the folder again. He looked at her hand against her stomach. He thought about what that meant, and then he stopped thinking about what it meant because if he let himself finish that thought, he would not be able to move, and he needed to move. He picked up his phone and called someone who didn't have a name in his contacts list, just a single initial. The call was answered on the second ring. "I need the clinic records from the Gangnam district. All women's health appointments cross-referenced against my wife's ID number. I need it in 20 minutes. The voice on the other end said something. "I don't care what time it is," Ji-hoon said. 20 minutes. He hung up. June came back with a tablet showing the gate footage. Ji-hoon watched it from the beginning. He watched Zuri park the car and sit in it. He watched her not move for 11 minutes, which meant she had been collecting herself, which meant whatever she had come to say required collecting herself first, and that specific detail settled somewhere in his chest like a piece of shrapnel, not immediately fatal, just buried there, pressing. He watched the guard speak into the earpiece. He watched the guard turn back to Zuri and say the words. He watched her face. Even at that resolution, in that light, in the rain, he could see what happened to her face in the second after the guard said what he said. It was not dramatic. That was the worst part. It was not the face of a woman who breaks down or screams or demands or collapses. It was the face of a woman who receives information she has been partly expecting and feels it confirms something she has been hoping was wrong. Then his phone rang again. Not this man with the initial. Different number. International. He looked at the number for 1 full second before he answered. The voice on the other end was smooth in the specific way of men who have never needed to raise their voice because the people around them already understand what will happen if they don't comply. "She's not dead if you're wondering," the voice said. "She's wet and she's scared, but she's breathing. I need you to understand that before we talk, because I need you present for this conversation and not reactive." Ji-hoon's hand tightened on the phone. "Min Seok," he said. A pause. Then, "It's been a long time, Ji-hoon." "Where is she?" "Somewhere safe, for now. That's a condition, not a promise. And the condition is contingent on you being intelligent for the next 60 seconds instead of whatever you usually are." Ji-hoon stood up from the desk. He walked to the window. His reflection was clear in the dark glass. Jacket still on, jaw set, a man standing in a lit room looking out at a dark city. He looked to himself exactly like the kind of man who had made every decision that had led to this moment. He looked like someone who had constructed this outcome with great care and thoroughness over a long period of time and was now looking at the finished product. "What do you want?" he said. "Oh, not much. I want to watch you understand that the thing you thought was separate from your business was never separate from your business. I want you to sit with the fact that you turned her away tonight. That part was me, by the way. The order that reached your gate, not the one you gave, that one was real. I grant you that. But the timing, making sure she came on tonight specifically, making sure there was something for her to see when she came, that part was mine." Ji-hoon's reflection in the window didn't move. "The woman at my dinner. Seo Yeon is very good at her job. She's been in your orbit for 3 weeks. You checked her references. Her references are impeccable, which is impressive considering I invented them entirely. Another pause, almost conversational. She wasn't there to get close to you, Ji-hoon. She was there to make sure your wife saw something worth leaving over. We needed her to drive. We needed her on that highway. The car was modified 3 days ago while it was parked outside a building in Mapo you own, and your wife visits once a week for reasons you apparently never asked about. Ji-hoon said nothing. She was going to leave anyway, Min Seok continued. I want you to know that. I want that to be accurate information you have. She had a bag packed. She had a plan. You already lost her before tonight. I just made sure tonight was the night, and I made sure she was somewhere I could find her when she went. Ji-hoon turned away from the window. He looked at June, who was standing in the doorway reading something on his phone with an expression that was trying to stay professional and not quite managing it. Tell me what you want, Ji-hoon said into the phone. I want you to know what it feels like, Min Seok said. I want you to spend tonight knowing she is somewhere in the city and that you cannot find her and that it is directly the result of every choice you made. Tomorrow, we can talk about whether there is something you can give me to change the present situation. Tonight is just for the knowing. The line went dead. Ji-hoon stood holding the phone for 3 seconds. Then he set it face down on the desk and looked at June. Min Seok Vos, he said. Tell me everything you know about where he's been for the last 6 months. June's expression confirmed what Ji-hoon had suspected since the first syllable of the phone call. Sir, we have a problem with that. Tell me. Our last 3 attempts to track Min Seok's location came back clean, not incomplete. Clean. Which means either he's operating on a level of operational security we haven't encountered before, or someone inside this organization has been cleaning the results before they reach me. June didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Ji-hoon picked up the folder again. He looked at the photograph of Zuri at the gate. He looked at her hand. He put the folder down. Lock down communications. No external calls without my authorization. Pull everyone off their current assignments and run them through verification. I don't care how long it takes or who it offends. He paused. And get me the clinic records. Whatever they show, I need to see it before anything else. The clinic records arrived in 17 minutes. Ji-hoon read them standing up, which was not how he usually read things. His doctor contact had sent a file and a short message beneath it. Appointment confirmed 14 days ago. Ultrasound at 8 weeks. She paid cash. She paid cash. She hadn't told anyone. She had gone alone, paid in cash, and then driven to his estate in the rain to tell him herself, which meant she had been carrying this information for 2 weeks and had decided that whatever was broken between them, whatever she had been planning, this was the thing that changed it, the thing that was worth trying once more. And she had stood at his gate in the rain while he had tilted his head toward a woman in a red dress and listened to her laugh like a man who had time to spare. He sat down. He didn't do it intentionally. His legs made the decision before his mind caught up. He sat down in the chair behind his desk and put both hands flat on the wood and breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, the way the man who had trained him in Busan had taught him to breathe when he needed to be capable, rather than present to what he was feeling. It didn't work the way it usually worked. June came back into the room. He stopped when he saw Ji-hoon's face. He had worked for this man for 8 years. And in 8 years he had seen Ji-hoon angry, calculated, cold, and once, at the funeral of a man Ji-hoon had genuinely respected, briefly and thoroughly human. He had not seen this before. This was something underneath the other things, something that didn't have the practice quality of Ji-hoon's usual affect. Sir? She's pregnant, Ji-hoon said. The room was quiet. 8 weeks. She came here to tell me and I had her turned away. He said it the way you say a thing that you need to hear in your own voice before you can believe it happened. Not for June's benefit, for his own. And then she went to the highway, and her car was disabled, and Min Seok has her. June's jaw was tight. We'll find her. Yes, Ji-hoon said. We will. He stood again, because sitting was not sustainable. But first I need to know who told Min Seok about the clinic. He said the car was modified 3 days ago at a building she visits weekly in Mapo. He knew her schedule. He knew what clinic she went to. He knew she was going to come tonight, and he had a mechanism in place to make sure she was in the right emotional state to drive fast and alone. He looked at June. Someone gave him her movements, her real movements. Not the version of her life that makes it into official reports. Someone who knows her actual routine. June's expression shifted. Go through every person in this organization who had access to any detail about my wife's daily life in the last 3 months, Ji-hoon said. Her schedule, her appointments, her preferred routes. Cross-reference it with anyone who has shown anomalous communication patterns, unexplained absences, or any financial irregularity in the last 6 months. Start with the inner circle. Don't skip anyone because you respect them. That includes everyone, Ji-hoon said. Yes. June left. Ji-hoon walked to the window again. This time he didn't look at his reflection. He looked at the city. He thought about the fact that Min Seok had been patient enough to spend 3 weeks placing a woman in his circle. He thought about what kind of patience that required. What kind of sustained, controlled hatred could produce that level of methodology. Min Seok's family had been dismantled 7 years ago. Not killed, dismantled, in the particular way Ji-hoon preferred, which was financial and legal and thoroughly documented and almost entirely untraceable. Min Seok had been 22. He had watched his father's organization evaporate and his father go to prison for things Ji-hoon had ensured could be conclusively proven. And he had spent 7 years building something new and apparently rebuilding himself into a man capable of this. Ji-hoon could almost respect it. He didn't. His phone lit up again. This time it was a message from June already, which meant whatever June had found, he had found it faster than expected. Check the Mapo building access log for the last 90 days. There's a name you need to see. Ji-hoon looked at the access log. He read the name. He read it again. He set the phone face down on the desk and stood with his hands flat on the wood and his head down and his eyes closed, and he breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, and this time the breathing worked the way it was supposed to, which was not comfort, but control. And control was the only thing he had available right now that was going to be useful. Han Dae-sung, 13 years. Dae-sung had been with him for 13 years. He had been in the car in Busan when Ji-hoon was 23 and not yet entirely sure of himself, and he had stayed in every room Ji-hoon had ever walked out of, making sure the room was still there when Ji-hoon needed to walk back in. He was not a smart man in the tactical sense. Ji-hoon had other people for tactics. But he was loyal in the specific way that loyal means something, which is that he had never been tempted by anything Ji-hoon had observed. The access log showed Dae-sung had been inside the Mapo building 11 times in 90 days. Zuri visited once a week. Their visits had overlapped on 4 occasions, 11 times. In a building where he had no operational reason to be. Ji-hoon picked the phone back up. He called June. "Bring him in," he said. I said bring him in, quietly, not roughly. Tell him I need to discuss something. Don't tell him what. He hung up and looked at the city and thought about 13 years, and then he stopped thinking about 13 years because Zuri was somewhere out there in it, wet and frightened, carrying a photograph of their child against her chest, and sentiment was a thing he could not afford right now. Dae-sung arrived 20 minutes later. He came without resistance, which told Ji-hoon one thing. He came with a face that was doing its best impression of relaxed, which told Ji-hoon another. Ji-hoon let him sit down. He sat across from him and put the access log between them on the desk without saying what it was. Dae-sung looked at it. A micro-expression moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular look of a man who has been waiting for a specific conversation and has now recognized its arrival. 11 visits, Ji-hoon said. No operational reason. 4 overlaps with her schedule. Dae-sung's hands were in his lap. They were still. That was, Ji-hoon thought, the tell. A man with nothing to hide moves his hands when he's confused. Dae-sung's hands were still because he was managing them. Ji-hoon, I'm not asking you to explain the visits, Ji-hoon said. I'm asking you to tell me the name of the person you were reporting to when you made them. The silence stretched for a long time. And then Dae-sung, who had been with Ji-hoon for 13 years, who had been in the car in Busan and in every room since, closed his eyes and said a name. Min Seok Vos. Ji-hoon heard the name in Dae-sung's voice and felt something go very still inside him that had been moving since the moment the call came in about the highway. How long? He said. 4 months. How? Dae-sung opened his eyes. They were wet, which was a thing Ji-hoon had not seen before. He has my daughter, Dae-sung said. He took her 2 weeks before he approached me. He sent me a photograph. Ji-hoon looked at him. She's 9 years old, Dae-sung said. His voice cracked on the word 9. Not dramatically, just fractionally, the way old wood cracks under pressure. It doesn't splinter, it just gives a little, and you can hear the giving. He said if I told you, or if I stopped, or if I gave him anything false, what did you give him? Dae-sung looked at the desk. Her clinic schedule. The route she takes to the Mapo building. The access code for the building's parking level. The detail in your appointment calendar that said you had a private dinner on the 14th, so he knew you'd be occupied. He paused. And your gate order. He knew you'd issued a blanket no visitors order. He might assure she went tonight specifically because he knew what she'd see. Ji-hoon did not move for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was completely level. Your daughter, where is she now? I don't know. I haven't known for 4 months. He sends me a photograph every 2 weeks to confirm she's alive. The last one was 6 days ago. Ji-hoon sat back in his chair. He looked at the man across from him. The man who had been in the car in Busan, who had stayed in every room. And he understood, with the particular clarity that comes in moments when the story you've been telling yourself collides with the facts, that he was looking at a man who had spent 4 months living inside an impossible choice and had made the only decision a man with a 9-year-old daughter could make. He did not forgive it. Forgiveness was not available right now. But he understood it, which was different, and understanding it meant he could not treat it the way he would treat simple betrayal. I'm going to need everything, Ji-hoon said. Every communication, every photograph, every instruction, every piece of information you gave him, and every way he contacted you. All of it, tonight. Dae-sung nodded. His hands were no longer still. They were gripping each other in his lap. And your daughter, Ji-hoon said. I will find her. That is not a negotiation, and it is not contingent on anything you give me. I will find her. He paused. But you will not leave this building until I tell you to. You understand why? Yes, Dae-sung said quietly. Ji-hoon stood up. He looked at the city through the window one more time. Somewhere in it, Min Seok had Zuri in a location that had been prepared in advance by a man who had spent 7 years thinking about this, who had built an organization from nothing while carrying a specific hatred with the care you give to something you intend to use. And somewhere in it, a 9-year-old girl had been gone for 4 months. And Zuri had been walking for over an hour in the rain with a folded photograph against her chest. Ji-hoon turned from the window. Get me everything we have on Min Seok's real estate holdings, he said to June, who had appeared silently in the doorway. Specifically waterfront. Specifically anything industrial. Specifically anything that went off the market quietly in the last 3 years. June was already on the phone before Ji-hoon finished the sentence. Ji-hoon picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd put it an hour ago, when the evening had still looked like a dinner he didn't entirely trust, and a wife he would call in the morning. He put it back on. He straightened the collar. He looked at the photograph still lying on the desk. Zuri at the gate, her hand against her stomach, the rain coming sideways. He picked it up. He folded it once, carefully, and put it inside his jacket pocket. Then he walked out of the office into the hall, where 8 men were waiting, and looked at each of them in turn, and said the only thing that needed saying. We're not waiting for morning. They had 12 locations by 2 in the morning. June spread the printouts across the conference table. Satellite images, property records, utility account histories, a handwritten note from someone Ji-hoon paid specifically to know things that didn't appear in any database. 12 properties connected to Min Seok, through 3 layers of shell companies, each layer dissolved and reformed under a different jurisdiction. The work was meticulous. 7 years of meticulous. Ji-hoon stood at the end of the table and looked at all 12. Eliminate anything inland, he said. Min Seok grew up on the Incheon waterfront. He thinks in terms of exits. He wants water behind him. 4 locations dropped off immediately. Eliminate anything with active utility accounts. He's not going to put her somewhere that generates a billing record. 3 more. Eliminate anything purchased in the last 18 months. He's been planning this for longer than that. He would have had a location prepared. 2 more. That left 3. 2 warehouses and a converted shipping facility. All waterfront, all dark, all acquired between 4 and 6 years ago through companies that had since been legally dissolved in ways that left no obvious trail back to any living person. Ji-hoon looked at the 3 locations for a long time. June stood beside him and didn't say anything because there was nothing useful to say. The math was simple. They had 3 possible locations. They had 1 Zuri. If they moved on the wrong location first, they burned their approach, and Min Seok moved her. If they split the team across all 3, they lost the concentrated force that a reinforced position would require. If they waited for better intelligence, they were waiting in a city where a pregnant woman had been in someone's custody for going on 3 hours. Daesung, Ji-hoon said without turning around. Daesung was sitting in the corner of the room. He had not been permitted to leave, but he had also not been restrained, because Ji-hoon needed him functional, and because restraining him would have felt, in this particular moment, like punishing a man for bleeding. He looked up. His eyes were dry now. He had moved through some internal process while Ji-hoon was working and had come out the other side into something that looked like a man waiting for a sentence to be delivered. The photographs he sent you, your daughter. What was in the background? Daesung sat forward. I looked. Everyone? He was careful. Blank walls, controlled light. But the third one, there was a sound. Not in the photograph. When he called to tell me the photograph was sent, there was a sound in the background. What kind of sound? Water. Moving water. Not rain. Something rhythmic. Industrial. He paused. And something else. Metal on metal. Like a mooring line against a cleat. A boat tied up nearby. Ji-hoon turned back to the table. He eliminated 1 location. The converted shipping facility sat 300 meters from the water, separated by a rail yard that would absorb sound. The 2 remaining warehouses were both directly waterfront, both with active dock access. These 2, he said. He looked at June. I need eyes on both within the hour. Not contact, not approach. Eyes only. I want sight lines, guard rotation, vehicle count, and whether there are lights anywhere inside that shouldn't be there. June was already moving. Ji-hoon looked at the table. He looked at the satellite images of the 2 warehouses and tried to build them in his mind the way he built every space before he moved through it. Exits, sight lines, structural cover, the geometry of violence in an enclosed space. He had done this hundreds of times. He was good at it. He had always been good at it in the specific way that people are good at things that cost them something every time they do it. His phone buzzed. Not June, not a number he recognized. He answered. Seo Yeon's voice was different than it had been at dinner. At dinner it had been warm and calibrated, the voice of a woman performing ease. Now it was flat and precise, the voice of someone who had dropped a character they no longer needed. I'm going to tell you something, she said. Not because I owe you anything, because he told me things tonight that I didn't agree to when I took this job, and I have my own calculation to make. Ji-hoon said nothing. The warehouse on Namdong Daero, she said. South End. The loading dock on the riverside. She's on the 2nd floor in a room that used to be a supervisor's office. There are 6 men inside and 2 outside at the dock. He has a secondary team 2 kilometers away that he can call in 10 minutes. If you move on that building with the kind of force you're thinking about, he will know before you breach the door. How? Because one of your men is still reporting to him. The room went absolutely still. Ji-hoon's hand tightened on the phone with a pressure he didn't register consciously. You're saying the leak isn't closed. Daesung was one source. He wasn't the only one. There's a second person in your organization who has been feeding Min Seok operational intelligence for longer than 4 months. Min Seok mentioned it tonight. He mentioned it because he was certain you wouldn't find them in time, and Min Seok talks when he feels safe. A pause. He doesn't know I'm making this call. Why are you making it? The pause this time was longer. He didn't tell me she was pregnant when he hired me, Seo Yeon said. He told me after dinner. He told me like it was an interesting detail, like it was useful. Her voice didn't change quality when she said it, but it changed in some other way that Ji-hoon couldn't precisely name. I don't do that kind of work. The line went dead. Ji-hoon lowered the phone. He looked at the men in the room. 8 men. He had worked with every one of them for a minimum of 3 years. He had made decisions with them, trusted their intelligence with things that would have destroyed him if mishandled, eaten at the same tables, attended the same funerals. He looked at their faces and understood with a cold, dismantling clarity that one of them was currently calculating whether to send a message. He couldn't show them what he knew. If the second informant realized he'd been identified, Min Seok would have Zuri relocated inside 20 minutes. If Ji-hoon moved on the warehouse before he'd identified and isolated the informant, Min-seok would know they were coming before they arrived. He had to find the person in this room without looking like he was finding them. He looked at June. June was the one person in the room he was prepared to bet his life on, because June had something Min-seok could not easily replicate. He had a hatred for men who operated outside structure that was almost philosophical, and he had expressed it over 13 years in ways that were consistent with someone who was not performing loyalty but actually felt it as a personal position. He walked to June and spoke quietly, turned away from the rest of the room, appearing to examine the satellite image. I need you to send the team a false target, right now. Tell them we've identified the Incheon facility as primary. Tell them we move in 90 minutes. I want to see who reaches for their phone in the next 5 minutes. June didn't blink. Understood. He turned back to the room and announced it clearly. Wrong warehouse, wrong timing. He gave them enough detail to make it credible, a staging point, a vehicle allocation, a role assignment. He gave them something to think about and something to prepare, and then he said he needed 2 minutes with Ji-hoon privately and led Ji-hoon into the hallway. Ji-hoon positioned himself at the hallway's single window, angled so his reflection in the dark glass showed him the room through the partially open door. He watched. 6 men absorbed the information in the way men absorb operational orders, some pulling up maps, some checking equipment, one pouring coffee. Normal. Expected. One man took out his phone and turned slightly away from the others. Ji-hoon watched his thumb move. The message was brief. The man's expression during it was completely neutral, which was itself the tell. You don't look neutral when you're texting something casual. You look slightly absent, slightly internal. This man looked like a man who was managing his expression, which was the opposite of neutral. The man's name was Cho Byung-soo. He had been with Ji-hoon for 5 years. He had come with a recommendation from a man in Daegu who Ji-hoon now rapidly recalculated in relation to every piece of intelligence that had moved through Cho's hands in the last 5 years. Ji-hoon turned back to June. Cho, he said simply. June's mouth went tight. He gave a single nod. Take him somewhere quiet. Don't do anything until I'm back. He needs to be isolated before he can confirm to Min-seok that the Incheon location is a false lead. If Min-seok doesn't get a confirmation, he'll be uncertain. Uncertainty buys us time. And if Min-seok calls him directly, then Cho won't answer because Cho won't have his phone. Ji-hoon looked through the window at the room. Do it now. Make it look administrative. June went back into the room. Ji-hoon watched through the reflection as June spoke to Cho quietly, showed him something on a tablet, suggested they step out to handle a communications issue. Cho went without hesitation because there was nothing in June's manner to cause hesitation. He had been reading June as safe for 5 years. The door closed behind them. Ji-hoon went back into the room. He looked at the remaining 6 men and thought about the mathematics of trust, how it accumulates over years, and how a single subtracted piece changes the calculation of everything adjacent to it. Change of target, he said. Namdong Daero Warehouse. South End. We move in 40 minutes. One of the men, Park Sung-il, who had been with Ji-hoon for 9 years and had a daughter of his own who was 11, looked up from his equipment check. What changed? Information, Ji-hoon said. Reliable. He looked at Sung-il specifically. Your team takes the dockside. I want the river exit covered before we touch the front approach. Sung-il nodded and went back to his equipment without another question, which was why Ji-hoon had chosen him. Ji-hoon went to find June. Cho was in a storage room off the east corridor, sitting in a chair that had been placed with a specific deliberateness in the center of the room. June was standing beside the door. Cho's phone was on the shelf behind him. He looked up when Ji-hoon came in and made a quick calculation with his eyes. Threat level, available options, the distance between himself and the door, and arrived at the only accurate conclusion, which was that there were none. How long? Ji-hoon said. Cho looked at the floor. I'm not going to have a long conversation about it, Ji-hoon said. I need one piece of information. Does Min-seok know that Seo Yeon called me tonight? Cho's eyes came up fast. That reaction was involuntary, and it told Ji-hoon what he needed. Cho hadn't known Seo Yeon had turned, which meant Min-seok hadn't told him, which meant Min-seok was compartmentalizing, which meant Min Seok didn't entirely trust his own network, which was the first genuine advantage Ji-hoon had identified since the phone call on the highway. He doesn't know, Ji-hoon said to June. Keep Cho here. Nothing happens to him tonight. If his daughter is still inside Min Seok's network when this is over, we find her. But he stays in this room. He walked out. 40 minutes. He walked back to the conference room and stood in front of the satellite image of the Namdong Daero warehouse and built it again in his mind. Riverside. Second floor. Supervisor's office. 6 men inside, 2 at the dock. A secondary team 2 kilometers out, 10 minutes response time. The mathematics of it were not good. A reinforced position with advanced warning capability against a team he had just reduced to 7 functional men, himself included, with no heavy equipment and no time to prepare the kind of approach that a building like that ideally required. He had done worse. He had also lost men doing worse, which was the part he didn't say out loud. His phone buzzed again. June from inside the building. Min Seok just called Cho's phone. I let it ring. Ji-hoon typed back. How many times? Twice. Stopped. He stared at the 2 words. Min Seok had called his informant, gotten no answer, and stopped after 2 attempts. A man who was comfortable would call more. A man who was feeling pressure would call more. A man who had stopped after 2 calls was a man who was making a decision about what the silence meant and what to do about it. He was going to move her. Ji-hoon picked up his jacket. Now, he said to the room. We go now. They went through the building's south entrance on foot, leaving the vehicles 2 blocks back because vehicles announce arrival, and arrival is the thing you cannot give away. The rain had thinned to something between mist and intention. Not heavy enough to matter, present enough to make everything surfaces slick and cold, and lit with the particular quality of light that comes off water in a city at 3 in the morning. The warehouse was dark. That was the first thing Ji-hoon registered as they came around the final corner of the approach. Not the shape of it, which he already knew from the satellite image, but the dark. Total absence of visible light from any window or aperture, which could mean it was empty or could mean it was a building full of people who were good at not using light they didn't need. Sung-il's team split to the dock side without hand signals because they'd covered the approach protocol before they left. Ji-hoon moved to the front with 3 men. He put his back to the wall beside the main entrance and listened. The river behind the building was doing what Dae-sung had described. Rhythmic, industrial, the particular sound of water moving through a space designed for commerce rather than for people. A mooring line somewhere was doing exactly what Dae-sung said, metal on metal, patient, repetitive. Then he heard something that wasn't the river. Voices, brief, 1 level above where they needed to be casual. 2 men outside the dock were adjusting their position. He could hear the crunch of footfall on the concrete apron, the specific sound of men moving because they've been told to move rather than because they want to. Min Seok had gotten the message from the unanswered phone. He was repositioning. Ji-hoon touched the shoulder of the man to his left twice. The signal they'd established for immediate entry, no staging. They went through the door. The inside of the warehouse was large and cold and dark, in the way industrial buildings are dark. Not an absence of light so much as an absorption of it, surfaces that take everything and give nothing back. Ji-hoon moved on memory and training and the faint ambient glow from the river-facing windows, which was enough, barely enough, to show him the staircase on the far wall. He had covered half the floor when the lights came on. Not overhead lights. Something lower, directional, 4 sources placed at intervals around the warehouse floor that turned the space into a blinding, disorienting grid of illumination and shadow. The kind of light placement that a man who had spent time preparing this location would set up specifically for the moment of unwanted entry, because it makes the entering party visible and the defending party, who know where the shadows are, invisible. Ji-hoon dropped immediately. His 3 men followed, not all of them fast enough. The first shot came from the elevated platform on the west side, above the staircase he'd been moving toward. It didn't hit anyone. It was placed to redirect, not to eliminate, a warning geometry designed by someone who wanted Ji-hoon moving in a specific direction. He recognized it and did not move in that direction, which meant flattening against a support column while the geometry of the room rearranged itself around the new information. He could hear Sung-il's team at the dock. Movement, One brief exchange that wasn't gunfire. Good. They were in. He looked at the staircase. 15 meters of open floor between his column and the base of the stairs. The shooter on the west platform had an angle on 11 of those 15 meters. He needed the shooter addressed before he could move. One of his men, reading the same geometry, moved left along the wall toward the platform's support structure. Ji-hoon watched him cover the distance in controlled bursts, using the support columns, reaching the base of the platform. He went up the outside of it. Ji-hoon watched the shooter's attention track left, away from the staircase. He ran, 15 meters. He covered it in the way you cover a distance when you understand that the covering is the only thing that matters and your body has agreed with your mind completely. He hit the staircase and went up without pausing because pausing is where people get shot. Pausing creates a moment of stillness that is the easiest target in the world. Second floor. A corridor. 3 doors. The middle door was reinforced. Not dramatically. Not a vault door. Not something that announced itself as significant. Just a standard door that someone had quietly added a second deadbolt to and an additional strike plate. If you weren't looking for it, it looked like the others. Ji-hoon was looking for it. He hit the lock twice with the tool he'd brought for exactly this, and the door came open and he went in fast and low, because fast and low is the only way to enter a room where someone might be waiting. The room was approximately 4 meters by 5. It had a window that had been painted over from the inside. There was a plastic chair, a space heater that had been running recently but was now off, a water bottle that was 3/4 empty, and a folded emergency blanket on the floor that still held the body heat impression of the person who had been lying under it. She wasn't there. Ji-hoon stood in the room and looked at the blanket and the water bottle and the chair and felt the empty space where she should have been with a physical force that was almost nauseating. He heard a sound from below. Not shooting. An engine. Riverside. He moved back to the window, found the edge of the painted-over section where the paint had cracked, and put his eye to the crack. Below, and to the left, at the dock, a flat-bottomed transport boat was pulling away from the mooring. 2 men on the dock covering the departure, Sungil's team engaging them. On the boat, in the stern, one figure standing. Min Seok. Ji-hoon recognized the stance. He had studied every photograph that existed of Min Seok Voss in the last 48 hours, which was only 3 photographs, but 3 was enough if you looked at them the way Ji-hoon looked at things. And beside Min Seok, standing in a way that said she was standing because she had decided to stand and not because she had been arranged, was Zuri. She was still wearing the coat. Even from this distance and this angle, through a crack in painted glass, he could see the coat. Ji-hoon turned and ran for the dock. He reached the dock as Sungil was clearing the last of the 2 exterior guards. The boat was 30 meters out and accelerating. It had a twin-engine configuration, and the river at this point was straight for 2 kilometers before the first bend, which meant once it made the bend, it was gone into a network of industrial canals that he did not have the resources to cover. He did the calculation in 4 seconds. He looked at the dock and saw the second boat, smaller, single-engine, the kind of flat craft that working waterfronts keep for dock maintenance. It was tied to the far cleat and had not been disabled because Min Seok had not anticipated needing to disable it, had not anticipated Ji-hoon arriving at this location at this time, had anticipated instead a false lead and a confirmation call that never came. That was the mistake. That one miscalculation, born from confidence and from a network that had suddenly lost its ability to function. Ji-hoon went for the maintenance boat. I was untying the mooring line when June appeared at his shoulder, breathing hard from the ground floor staircase, with an expression that said he had assessed the situation and made a decision. "You're not going alone," June said. It was not a request. Ji-hoon looked at him, at the boat, at the stern light of Min Seok's transport already 40 meters out, and made the only decision available. "Get in," he said. The engine started on the second pull, which felt like something but was just mechanics. The river took them immediately, cold and black, and moving with the specific indifference of things that predate all human conflict and will outlast it. And the distance between the 2 boats was 40 meters and then 35, and the bend was visible ahead, the industrial canal system beyond it. And Ji-hoon held the engine at full and watched the gap close and thought about Zuri standing in the stern of the forward boat with her hand pressed flat against her stomach. The bend was coming fast. On the forward boat, Min Seok turned and looked back. Even across the dark water and the distance, Ji-hoon could feel the quality of that look. Not surprise, not fear, but something that was almost satisfaction. The look of a man who has spent 7 years building toward a moment and has now arrived at it and finds that the moment is exactly what he needed it to be. Min Seok put his hand on Zuri's arm. She looked back too. Ji-hoon held the engine at full and did not think about anything except the distance and the bend and the 30 meters and then 25 and the cold spray off the river and the fact that somewhere in the logic of tonight there was still a path through this that ended with her safe, and he was going to find it, or he was going to find out exactly what it cost to try. The forward boat hit the bend and turned. Ji-hoon turned with it. The canal opened ahead of them, narrow, concrete-walled, lit every 200 meters by a single industrial lamp that turned the water orange at intervals and left everything between the lamps in absolute dark. On the water ahead, Min Seok's boat was visible as a moving shape and a stern light and the sound of the engine off the canal walls. June said something from the bow. Ji-hoon didn't hear the words but heard the tone. Urgent, specific. He looked where June was pointing. Across the canal, 200 meters ahead, at the next lamp's pool of light, something was happening on Min Seok's boat that was not the boat continuing forward at speed. The boat had slowed. Min Seok was not slowing because he had seen them gaining. He was slowing because something on the boat had changed, and as the distance between the two crafts contracted to 15 meters and then 10 in the slowed water, Ji-hoon could see what had changed. Zuri was not standing anymore. She was down on the deck of the boat, not thrown, not collapsed. She had gone down deliberately, with the specific deliberateness of a woman who had made a decision about what she was willing to be part of and had decided that cooperating with the upright, cooperative posture was no longer something she was going to offer. She had gone dead weight, and Min Seok was standing over her with an expression that Ji-hoon could now see clearly in the canal lamp's orange light. And the expression was the specific expression of a man whose plan has encountered the one variable he did not fully account for, which was the variable of the woman herself. Her specific stubbornness, her specific refusal, the thing that Ji-hoon had spent 4 years sometimes resenting and sometimes depending on, and had never, until this moment on a canal at 3 in the morning. In the rain, understood was the most important thing about her. Ji-hoon brought the maintenance boat alongside, and Min Seok looked at him across the rail of the boat with those 7 years of patient, constructed hatred and said the last thing Ji-hoon had expected him to say. "You want to know why I didn't just kill her?" Ji-hoon said nothing. He held the rail of Min Seok's boat with one hand and kept the other at his side. "Because killing her would have taken something from you," Min Seok said. "But raising your child without you, making sure that child grows up knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you cost people, that takes everything." The canal lamp hummed overhead. Zuri, on the deck of the boat, turned her head and looked at Ji-hoon. Her face was wet and exhausted and carrying the specific expression of a woman who has been awake for 19 hours in conditions designed to destroy her composure and has not been destroyed, and was now looking at her husband across a rail on a canal in the orange light. And the expression on her face was not relief exactly, and not anger exactly, but something that encompassed both and was also something beyond both. The expression of a woman reassessing, rapidly, every assumption she had made about tonight, and about the man across the rail, and about what came next. Ji-hoon looked at her. He looked at her and felt something restructure itself inside him. Not dramatically, not with the sudden violence of a revelation, but in the quiet, irrevocable way of a thing that has been slowly failing for a long time, finally completing its collapse, leaving behind only the essential load-bearing parts. "You have 2 options," Min Seok said to him. "You get back in your boat and you let me take her where I'm going and your child grows up with a story about who you are. Or you do what you actually want to do and you find out what happens next." Ji-hoon looked at Min Seok. He said nothing. He stepped across the rail onto Min Seok's boat. Ji-hoon's foot hit the deck of Min Seok's boat and the world compressed into the next 3 seconds. Min Seok moved first, not toward Ji-hoon, but sideways, toward the console, toward something mounted beneath it that Ji-hoon registered as a threat before he'd consciously identified what it was. He crossed the deck in 2 steps and got his hand on Min Seok's wrist before the hand reached whatever was mounted there, and Min Seok turned and drove his elbow back hard, catching Ji-hoon across the jaw at an angle that wasn't clean, but had enough force behind it to knock his vision sideways for a half second. Ji-hoon held the wrist. He held it through the vision going sideways and through the pain that arrived a full second after the impact, because that's how pain works when your body is running on something other than normal operating conditions. He held it and twisted and put his weight behind it, and Min Seok made a sound that was not quite a yell, more the involuntary output of a body experiencing structural duress. And his hand opened. The weapon clattered on the deck. Both men looked at it. A compact radio unit, not a firearm. Min Seok had been going for the radio. Ji-hoon understood immediately. The secondary team. 2 kilometers out, 10 minutes response time. Min Seok had been reaching for the call. He kicked the radio into the river. Min Seok watched it hit the water and then looked at Ji-hoon with an expression that was recalibrating in real time. The satisfaction that had been there a moment ago was not gone exactly, but it had shifted position, moved into something more considered. He was not a physical coward. Ji-hoon could see that in the way he'd thrown the elbow, in the way he was standing now. He had fought before, understood the geometry of it, was not going to panic. He was going to think his way through the next 60 seconds. That made him more dangerous, not less. "June," Ji-hoon said without turning. "Covering the dockside," June's voice came from behind him. He had stayed in the maintenance boat, keeping it alongside, keeping their exit open. Smart. Ji-hoon stepped back 2 feet and looked at Min Seok and then at Zuri. She was sitting up now, back against the gunwale, watching both of them with the specific quality of attention that someone has when they are very tired and very cold, and have been through enough tonight to have burned through every available register of fear and arrived somewhere beyond it. Her right hand was inside her coat. He knew what she was pressing against, and he didn't let himself think about it. "Can you walk?" he said to her. "Don't talk to her," Min Seok said. "Yes," Zuri said at the same time. Ji-hoon looked at Min Seok. "She's going to get in the other boat." "No," Min Seok said. "She isn't. Because if she gets in the other boat, then you leave. And if you leave, the only thing I have left is to make a phone call that I was just prevented from making, and my secondary team comes here, and this entire evening becomes a very different situation for all of the men you brought with you to that warehouse." He paused. He was breathing through his mouth, controlled, the breath of a man managing pain in his wrist. "You're not going anywhere, Ji-hoon. None of you are. Not until I decide." "Your secondary team doesn't know where we are," Ji-hoon said. "They have a protocol for loss of contact. The protocol requires 30 minutes before activation. You've been standard communication for the last hour. They'll wait 20 more minutes before they move, and by then, this will be finished." Min Seok looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes, an assessment, a recalculation. "You did your homework." "I've been doing my homework since 10:58 this evening." "That's 7 hours." "I'm a fast reader." It was not the moment for that kind of exchange, and both of them knew it, which was why Min Seok almost laughed. Not with humor, but with the specific reflex of a man who respects a certain kind of nerve even in an adversary, especially in an adversary. Then Min Seok stopped almost laughing and pulled a knife from his jacket. Not a large knife. A working knife, the kind a man carries when he is practical about what tools a given situation might require. It was 7 inches, serrated on the upper third, and he held it the way a man holds a knife when he knows how to use it. Not extended, not dramatic, kept close to the body where it's harder to read and harder to reach. Ji-hoon looked at the knife. He looked at the distance between himself and Min Seok, which was 4 feet. He looked at the deck, which was wet and moving because the boat was still drifting in the current, slowly carrying them downstream toward the next canal lamp, whose light was 30 meters away and approaching. He did not have a knife. He had a firearm in the holster at his left side that he had not drawn because drawing it on a 4-foot boat deck in the dark is a different proposition than drawing it anywhere with room, and because Min Seok was close enough and fast enough that the 4 feet was not the kind of distance that made a firearm straightforwardly reliable. "Zuri," Ji-hoon said, his eyes staying on Min Seok. "Move to the front of the boat, now." She moved. He could hear her moving behind him, the sound of her coat against the gunwale, her feet on the deck. She was moving without argument, which told him she understood the geometry of what was happening and was not going to complicate it by needing to be told twice. Min Seok watched her move and then looked back at Ji-hoon. 7 years, Min Seok said. He said it the way people say things they have said inside their own head so many times that the words have worn grooves. You know what 7 years of thinking about someone does to you? It doesn't make you hate them more. After the first year, the hate starts to simplify. It becomes very clear, very specific. I didn't want to destroy your business. I didn't want your money. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to have the thing that defines your life taken from you by someone who is not even fully present when they do it. Ji-hoon said nothing. Your father built that organization, Min Seok said. Mine did too. Your father won. You know what winning meant? It meant my father watching everything he built for 30 years disappear in 18 months. It meant my mother's name in newspapers attached to words like fraud and corruption. It meant my younger brother, who had nothing to do with any of it, couldn't get work for 3 years because of the name he was born with. He took one step to the left. Ji-hoon tracked it. You didn't pull a trigger, you didn't get blood on your hands, you just arranged things, very carefully, very cleanly. And then you had dinner. Your father made choices, Ji-hoon said. So did you. Min Seok's jaw tightened. Every choice you made, I paid for. Every choice. And tonight I wanted you to pay for exactly one of yours. Just one. The one where you turned her away at that gate. He paused. That one was real, Ji-hoon. I didn't invent that choice. I just made sure you had to live with what it cost. The canal lamp's light reached them. For 3 seconds, the boat was fully illuminated in orange, and both men could see each other clearly. The knife, the distance, the wet deck, Zuri at the bow with her hand inside her coat. Then the light passed, and they were back in dark. Min Seok moved. He moved fast, and he moved with the specific economy of someone who had thought about this kind of movement. And Ji-hoon moved at the same time, not because he had anticipated the exact trajectory, but because the body of a man who has been in this situation before has its own intelligence that runs slightly ahead of conscious thought. He went inside the arc of the knife, closer, not farther, which is counterintuitive to everything except the knowledge that a knife at 4 feet is more dangerous than a knife at 1 foot, because at 1 foot the arm can't extend, and took Min Seok's knife hand at the wrist with both hands and drove it backward. They went into the console together. The console edge caught Ji-hoon across the left shoulder blade with a force that sent a white spike of pain down to his wrist, and for a half second his grip on Min Seok's wrist weakened, and Min Seok felt it and rotated, and the knife moved, and Ji-hoon felt the serrated edge catch the outside of his left forearm. Not deep, not a disabling cut, but a real one, and real cuts on a boat in motion in the cold at 3 in the morning have an immediate physiological quality. The cold, the adrenaline, the blood, which is warmer than everything around it and registers in the nerve endings with a clarity that briefly reorganizes your entire sensory priority list. Ji-hoon reorganized in approximately 1 second. He slammed Min Seok's knife hand against the console edge once, twice. The second impact worked. The knife clattered and slid and went over the side. Min Seok pulled his hand back and looked at it, and then looked at Ji-hoon and made a decision, not to recover the advantage, but to change the game entirely. He went for Zuri. He went across the deck fast, using the boat's drift and his knowledge of the deck's layout to cover the distance before Ji-hoon could redirect. Ji-hoon went after him and got his hand on the back of his jacket, and both of them hit the gunwale at the bow, and the boat rocked, and Zuri, who had been sitting against the port side forward, scrambled sideways. Min Seok grabbed her coat. Ji-hoon pulled Min Seok backward by the collar with everything he had in his right arm, while his left forearm was reporting a continuous stream of information he didn't have bandwidth to process. Min Seok's grip on Zuri's coat didn't break, and for 2 seconds, which is a very long time when 3 people are at the bow of a drifting boat on a canal in the dark, the equation was Ji-hoon pulling back, Min Seok holding on, Zuri between them. Zuri drove the heel of her palm into Min Seok's nose. It was not a trained movement. It was the movement of a woman who has one hand free and a clear target and has passed the threshold of being willing to simply endure what is happening to her. It connected squarely, and the result was immediate. Min Seok's head went back, his grip on her coat opened reflexively, and Ji-hoon used the half-second of his loosened resistance to pull him completely backward and down onto the deck. Min Seok hit the deck on his back. Ji-hoon put one knee on his chest and his forearm across his throat. The left forearm, which cost him, but it was the angle that worked, and looked down at him. Min Seok looked up. His nose was streaming. I was breathing through his mouth. The satisfaction was entirely gone now. What was there instead was something older and more elemental. The look of a man who has carried a thing for a very long time and has now arrived at the end of his capacity to carry it and doesn't know what comes next. "The girl," Ji-hoon said. His voice was the flat, pressureless voice of someone running entirely on functional core. "Daesung's daughter, where?" Min Seok said nothing. Ji-hoon increased the pressure of his forearm. Not to injure, to be precise about the cost of silence. "Where?" "She's safe," Min Seok said. The words came out compressed from a throat with a forearm across it. "She was always going to be safe. I don't—" He stopped. His jaw moved. "I'm not my father's enemies. I'm not you." "Address," Ji-hoon said. Min Seok gave it. Ji-hoon looked at him for 3 more seconds to confirm his eyes were doing what eyes do when a person is telling the truth. Not the absence of movement, which people assume means honesty, but the specific quality of someone whose story and their body have arrived at the same place. He got up. He pulled Min Seok up by the collar and walked him to the engine console and looked at June in the maintenance boat alongside. "I need a phone," he said. "Mine's gone." June threw his. Ji-hoon called Sung-il at the warehouse with the address Min Seok had given him. "Go now. Don't call ahead. Don't announce. Just get there and call me when you have her." He hung up. He looked at Zuri. She was standing at the bow, leaning against the rail, one hand on the rail and one hand inside her coat. Her face was wet, and her coat was had been soaked through for hours. And she was looking at him with those eyes that had been looking at him for 4 years, seeing him more clearly than he had ever been entirely comfortable with. "Are you hurt?" he said. She looked at him for a moment before she answered. "I'm not hurt." He looked at her hand inside her coat. "It's still there," she said. She knew exactly what he was looking at. It didn't get wet. Something moved through Ji-hoon's chest that was not manageable in the way he managed things, and he made a deliberate decision not to try to manage it, to simply let it exist in him while he kept his face functional and his hands on the available work. He tied Min Seok's wrists with the mooring line from the bow cleat. He checked the knot twice. Min Seok sat against the console and looked at the canal wall and didn't speak. June pulled the maintenance boat alongside and held it. "Can you get across?" Ji-hoon said to Zuri. 3 feet of water between the boats, both moving gently in the current. Cold, dark, her exhaustion visible in the set of every muscle. "Yes," she said. She got across. She didn't need his hand, but he put it out, and she took it for the last foot of the crossing, and the weight of her grip, the specific, known, living weight of it, after 6 hours of knowing she was somewhere in the city and not being able to find her, went through him like something electric. She was in the maintenance boat. He looked at June. "Take her back to the dock. Call the medical team I had on standby. Don't let her argue about the medical team." Zuri said, "I can hear you." "I know," Ji-hoon said. He looked at her directly. "Don't argue about the medical team." Her jaw moved. She didn't agree, but she didn't disagree, which from Zuri had always meant provisional acceptance under protest, and he understood her language well enough after 4 years to receive that as a yes. He stepped back onto Min Seok's boat. He turned and picked up the radio that he'd kicked toward the river. It had not gone into the river, had caught on a deck fitting, and held it and looked at it and thought about Min Seok's secondary team and the 20 minutes before their protocol activated. He had 16 minutes. "Where is your team staging?" he said to Min Seok. Min Seok looked at the canal wall. Ji-hoon put the radio in his jacket pocket. He went to the engine console and looked at the canal ahead and thought about the geometry of it. The canal system, the docks, the river beyond, the city wrapped around all of it, operating on its normal nighttime logic, entirely unaware of the specific catastrophe that had been moving through it since 1058. He needed Min Seok's secondary team to not arrive at this location. He needed them to go somewhere else, to be redirected, to be given something convincing enough to hold them for the time required to have Min Seok in proper custody and Zuri in medical care and the night effectively over. He looked at Min Seok. "You're going to call your team," he said. "You're going to tell them the operation is complete and they should return to the staging house and wait." "I'm not going to do that," Min Seok said. "You are," Ji-hoon said. Because Daesung's daughter is currently being picked up by my people at the address you just gave me. And if she is at that address and she is unharmed, then I have no further use for the leverage I would otherwise apply to get you to make this phone call. If she is not at that address, or if she has been harmed, then I will make this phone call using your voice in a way that you will find very unpleasant. And I would prefer to avoid that because it is time-consuming and I've already been up for 19 hours. Min Seok looked at him. Or, Ji-hoon said, you make the call, she's there, she's fine, and tonight ends without additional casualties on either side. And in the morning, you deal with the legal consequences of kidnapping, extortion, and criminal conspiracy, which are significant, but which are significantly better than the alternative. Min Seok looked at the canal wall. He looked at his bound wrists. He looked at the river, which was doing what the river does, which is move without opinion through whatever the city puts in front of it. She's there, he said. She's been there the whole time. I don't use children. Make the call. Min Seok made the call. Ji-hoon listened to every word. The voice on the other end of the radio confirmed receipt and asked no questions. Min Seok's operational discipline, even in defeat, was thorough. Ji-hoon filed that observation away in the part of his mind that keeps observations about dangerous people, even defeated ones. He took the radio back. He drove Min Seok's boat to the nearest dock access, a commercial pier 200 meters upstream, and tied it and walked Min Seok off it and handed him to the two men from the warehouse team who had tracked Ji-hoon's movement through the canal system using June's last location ping. He stood on the pier. His left forearm had stopped the urgent bleeding and moved into the steady, dull, bone-deep complaint that cuts make when the adrenaline begins to metabolize. His shoulder blade, where it had hit the console, was doing something that would be interesting in the morning. His jaw, where Min Seok's elbow had connected, was a separate conversation entirely. He was aware of all of it at approximately 30% capacity. The rest of him was doing something else. Sung-il called. She's here, Sung-il said. He meant Daesung's daughter. She's okay. She's asking for her dad. Ji-hoon closed his eyes for 1 second. Tell her he's coming. He hung up and called June. Where are you? Medical dock, North End. The team's with her. She's... A pause, which was not like June. She's arguing about the medical team. Ji-hoon said, I know. She's letting them check the baby. She's just arguing about everything else. That's normal, Ji-hoon said. He was walking. He didn't remember deciding to walk, but his feet had made the decision and were implementing it. I'm coming. He walked the 2 kilometers from the pier to the medical dock at a pace that was somewhere between walking and not walking, the pace of a man whose body has used most of what it had and is managing the remainder carefully. The city around him was the city at 4 in the morning, mostly closed, mostly dark, the specific populated emptiness of an urban space that is turned inward but not off. He thought about Min Seok's voice on the canal. You didn't pull a trigger, you didn't get blood on your hands. You just arranged things. He thought about that for the full 2 kilometers. He did not arrive at a comfortable conclusion, which was probably the appropriate outcome. Comfortable conclusions about the kind of decisions he had made over the last 15 years would have required a dishonesty he was not going to extend to himself on a canal dock at 4 in the morning with a cut on his arm and a daughter somewhere in the city with someone asking for her father. He arrived at the medical dock. The mobile unit was parked inside a secured berth, a converted maintenance bay, something Ji-hoon owned through the same real estate structures that owned half of the waterfront. The medical team were 2 people he kept on a specific retainer for situations that required medical response without record. They were professional and discreet, and they were right now doing their work efficiently, despite what was clearly an argumentative patient. He could hear Zuri's voice from outside. She was not yelling. She was doing something more specific than yelling. She was deploying the particular register of her voice that meant she had constructed an argument and intended to deliver all of it. He went in. She was sitting on the examination table, still in the coat. They had apparently not won the coat argument, with sensors on her wrist and a portable ultrasound unit on the table beside her that she had not yet permitted anyone to use. She looked up when he came in. The argument stopped. The medical team looked at Ji-hoon with an expression that communicated relief and a complete willingness to transfer responsibility. She needs the ultrasound, Ji-hoon said to Zuri. I know she needs the ultrasound, Zuri said. I am not arguing about the ultrasound. I am arguing about the fact that no one in this room has told me anything about what is happening, and everyone keeps asking me to perform a calm I do not currently have access to. Jihoon looked at the medical team. Give us 5 minutes. They gave them 5 minutes. The door closed. The room was very quiet. The canal sounds outside, the boat engines, the water on the hull of something nearby. A fluorescent panel overhead that buzzed faintly at a frequency that in other circumstances would have been irritating. Jihoon stood in the middle of the room and looked at Zuri. She looked at him. Daesung's daughter, he said. She's safe. She's been retrieved. She's asking for him. Something in Zuri's face shifted at that. Not all the way, but a small specific shift. The kind of thing that happens when a fact that was previously theoretical becomes concrete and the body responds to the concrete differently than to the theoretical. Min Seok, she said, in custody. She looked at his arm, at the jacket, which was dark enough not to show the blood clearly, but the stiffness in the way he was holding it was visible. You're cut. It's minor. Hoon. It's minor, he said again. I've had worse. I know you've had worse. She said it quietly. That's not the point. He looked at her. The coat was soaked, and it had been soaked for over 6 hours, and she was sitting on an examination table at 4 in the morning with her hand flat against the inside of it, against the photograph that had survived the night dry, and she was looking at him with the specific directness that had been one of the first things he'd noticed about her years ago, in a room entirely unlike this one. The quality of looking at a person and not at the version of them you need them to be. She came tonight to tell you, Zuri said. It was not a question. She was processing something aloud. And you didn't know. I didn't know. The order was real, the no visitors order. Yes, it was a standing instruction for that evening. It was not, I didn't know she would come. I didn't know what she was bringing. He stopped. He said the next part because it was the accurate version. I hadn't been thinking about what she might be bringing, because I hadn't been thinking about her the way I should have been. The fluorescent light buzzed. Zuri looked at her own hands for a moment, then up. The woman, she said. The dinner. An operative, Jihoon said, placed by Min Seok. The entire evening was arranged to ensure that you saw what you saw. Something complicated moved across her face. He watched it move. Not a single emotion, but a sequence. Layered in the way complicated things are layered in complicated people who process quickly and honestly. Relief was in there, which she didn't look entirely comfortable with, because relief at finding out a thing wasn't what it appeared to be, still required admitting that seeing it had hurt the way it hurt. He knew it would work, she said. Min Seok. He knew that was what would send me driving. Yes, because he knew enough about us to know what I was afraid of. Jihoon said nothing. Because someone who was watching us closely enough to know my clinic schedule was also watching us closely enough to know the exact thing that would break me. She paused. That's what he built his plan around. Not just my location, my schedule, the specific fracture point. He knew exactly where to push. Jihoon said, yes. And he found the fracture point because we gave it to him. She said it without accusation, just accuracy. Because there was a fracture point to find. He said nothing for a moment, then, yes. The room was quiet. Jihoon moved to the chair beside the examination table. Not the chair for patients, the chair that was there for the person accompanying the patient, and sat down. His arm had progressed from dull complaint to something more insistent, and he was managing it the way he managed things that required management without additional comment. Zuri watched him sit. Let the doctor look at your arm, she said. After the ultrasound, he said. I want to be here for the ultrasound. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in the moment had the quality of things that are said without words, which is the only mode that works when the words available are either insufficient or too large for the specific container of the moment. She took the coat off. Inside the inner pocket, flat against the lining, was the ultrasound image. It was, as she had told him on the canal, dry. Perfectly, absurdly dry. Having traveled 6 hours through the worst night either of them had lived, against her body, kept there with a deliberateness that was so specific and so like her that something in Jihoon's chest moved again in the unmanageable way. She put the coat down and held the image and looked at it for a moment, and then handed it to him. He took it. The image was dated 14 days ago, 8 weeks. a shape that was still more promise than form, the particular ambiguity of something that is fully real and not yet fully itself. He looked at it the way he'd looked at it in the folder. In the photograph of Zuri at the gate, her hand pressed there. "She's okay," "Hey," Zuri said. "I could feel it the whole time. I know that's not science, but I could feel that she was okay." Jihoon looked up. "She?" Zuri's mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, something tired and worn, and underneath the tiredness, real. "I don't know, I've been saying she in my head." Jihoon looked back at the image. He had not cried since his father's funeral 11 years ago, and he was not going to cry now because the night was not over, and there were still things to be handled, and he was not a man who performed emotion on timelines dictated by the emotion. But something in his face did something, some small surrender of the structure he maintained over it, and Zuri saw it the way she saw everything, directly, without comment. She reached over and knocked twice on the door. The medical team came back in. "The ultrasound," Zuri said, and then his arm. Jihoon sat in the chair beside the examination table and held the photograph and watched the screen come to life, and listened to the sound that filled the room. Rhythmic, fast, small, and absolute. The sound of something entirely separate from all of them that had been there all along and intended to continue. The heartbeat. It was 163 beats per minute. The technician said this was normal. Healthy, in fact. Excellent for 8 weeks. Jihoon sat with the sound of it filling the room and felt the specific quality of a man who has spent years constructing a version of himself adequate to the life he chose and is now sitting in a medical bay at 4 in the morning, listening to evidence that there are things he built without knowing he was building them. Things that do not require his management or his strategy or his control. Things that exist with a completeness entirely independent of every decision he has or hasn't made. The heartbeat continued. 163. He held the photograph and did not look away from the screen and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the sound wasn't already saying better than he could. Outside, the canal was quiet. The city was almost quiet. The night had nearly exhausted itself. Min Seok was in a vehicle heading toward a facility that would hold him until the morning's legal architecture could be assembled to do it properly. Daesung's daughter was in a car heading toward her father. The warehouse team was clearing the Namdong building and managing the evidence in the ways that Jihoon's organization managed evidence. Cho was still in the storage room, and Jihoon had already begun thinking about what came next for Cho with the specific clarity of a man who knows that the thing he most wants to do and the thing he should do are not the same thing, and who has spent enough years in the space between those two options to know how to navigate it. There was still the morning. There was still everything the morning would require. But right now there was the sound. 163. And the code on the table with the photograph he was still holding. And Zuri on the examination table, looking at the screen with her hand finally resting on her own stomach without the desperate pressure of someone protecting something. Resting there simply, the way a hand rests on something that is present and known and accounted for. The doctor said something about the arm. Jihoon extended it without looking away from the screen. The heartbeat continued, steady and fast, entirely unimpressed by everything that had happened in the last 6 hours, entirely committed to its own ongoing business, 163 times a minute, in the specific and absolute way of things that have decided to exist and mean to go on existing, regardless of what the world around them is doing. Jihoon held the photograph and listened and did not look away. The doctor put 14 stitches in Jihoon's left forearm. He counted them. Not because he needed to, but because counting was the thing he did now, apparently. The thing that had started with Zuri sitting in her car outside the gate counting minutes and had passed to him somewhere over the course of the night. This habit of measuring things in units because units give you the illusion of boundaries around experiences that have no natural edges. 14 stitches. The cut was 4 inches long and had gone through 2 layers, but missed everything structural. The doctor said he'd been lucky. Jihoon didn't respond to that because luck was not a category he'd ever found useful. Luck implied an alternative outcome that had been narrowly avoided, and he had spent 15 years constructing situations where the alternative outcome was not available, which was different from luck and considerably more expensive. Zuri watched the stitching from the examination table. She had not been moved to a different location because she had declined to be moved, and the medical team had arrived at the pragmatic conclusion that a woman who had spent 6 hours in the rain being hunted and had still found the energy to drive a heel palm strike into a man's face was probably going to be fine where she was. The ultrasound was over. The image was in Ji-hoon's jacket pocket now, alongside the original photograph he'd taken from the folder in his office. He had not asked if he could keep it. Zuri had not told him to give it back. Some negotiations happen in the space between what people do and don't say, and both of them had enough fluency in that particular language to know when they were conducting one. The doctor finished and left. The room was quiet in the specific way of rooms at 4:30 in the morning that have recently been occupied by more people and more urgency than they were designed for, a quality of settled air, of things having passed through. June knocked once and came in without waiting, which was June's established mode of entry and had been for 8 years. Min Seok is at the holding facility, he said. The legal team has been briefed. They're building the filing for the morning arraignment, kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy. The waterfront operation has been cleared. Your people are out. He paused. Sung-il has the girl. He's taking her to Daesung now. Ji-hoon looked at June's face. The girl. What's her name? Ha-eun, June said. She's 9. He stopped. He was not a man who stopped in the middle of sentences, so the stopping itself was information. She didn't cry when Sung-il got her. She asked if her father knew she was coming. That was the first thing she said. The room was quiet again. Cho, Ji-hoon said, still in the storage room. June's jaw was set. Waiting on your decision. Ji-hoon looked at the wall. He thought about Cho Byung-soo, 5 years, a man who had come with a recommendation from Daegu and had never given Ji-hoon a specific reason for doubt, which was itself a form of professional excellence that Ji-hoon now had to reckon with differently. He thought about what Cho had given Min Seok and what it had cost. He thought about the fact that unlike Daesung, whose betrayal had a 9-year-old daughter inside it, Cho's calculus was not yet known to him. He didn't know what Min Seok had offered or threatened. He didn't know enough to make the decision that June was waiting for. In the morning, Ji-hoon said. I'll talk to him in the morning. He stays where he is until then, and he's not harmed. I need to understand what he was given before I decide anything. June nodded once. Daesung, Ji-hoon said. When Ha-eun is with him, tell him I want to see him tomorrow afternoon. Not as a formal meeting. Tell him I want to see him. June's expression moved slightly. Not surprised, because June had been watching Ji-hoon make decisions for 8 years and had a reasonable model of the man. More like a careful registration of something he was noting for its significance. Understood. He left. Ji-hoon and Zuri were alone again. She was looking at the window of the medical bay, which was a high rectangle that showed a strip of sky. Still dark, but with the first suggestion of the particular quality of darkness that precedes light, that is not yet light, but has begun its negotiation with it. Ha-eun, she said. 9 years old, he said. 4 months. Zuri absorbed this. She was still looking at the window. Her father spent 4 months betraying you to keep her alive. Yes. And you're going to see him tomorrow. Yes. She turned from the window and looked at him. The looking was direct, as it always was, but there was something in it now that was different from the looking he knew. Not softer, not harder, but layered differently, the way a thing looks when you've seen it from a new angle, and the new angle doesn't replace the old one, but coexists with it and makes the whole thing more complex and therefore more accurate. Who are you going to be when you see him? She said. It was not an abstract question. She meant it specifically. Which version of Ji-hoon was going to walk into that meeting? The one who kept accounts. The one who understood that a man with a 9-year-old daughter had made the only decision available to him. She wanted to know if those two versions of him were going to be the same version or different ones. He thought about the answer for a long time, which was itself an answer of a kind, because the old version of him would not have needed to think about it. I don't know yet, he said. She held his eyes. Then she nodded, once, the way she nodded when she received an honest answer that she hadn't necessarily expected. Okay, she said. The hospital was in Mapo, 12 minutes from the waterfront by car. June drove. Ji-hoon sat in the back with Zuri, and neither of them spoke for the first 7 minutes, which was not an uncomfortable silence, but a specific kind of silence, the silence of people who have been through something together and are separately processing the fact that they went through it together, which is different from processing it alone and requires a different kind of quiet. At the 8-minute mark, Zuri said, "I had a bag packed." Ji-hoon looked at her. "At the apartment in Yeonhui-dong, the one you own but I've been using. I had a bag. I was going to—" She paused. Not because she was uncertain, but because she was being precise. "I was going to tell you about the baby, and then I was going to leave. Not immediately, but within the week. I had it planned out." He said nothing. "I want you to know that," she said, "because I don't want you to think that what happened tonight changed something that wasn't already changed. It didn't change the situation. The situation was already what it was." "I know," he said. "Min Seok knew it too," she said. "That's what made tonight possible. Not just the logistics, the fact of it, the fact that I was already leaving." Ji-hoon looked out the window at the city passing. The streetlights were on and the streets were wet and mostly empty, and Seoul at almost 5 in the morning had a quality he had always found interesting. It looked like a city between versions of itself, the nighttime version ending and the morning version not yet assembled, a threshold state. "He told me on the canal," Ji-hoon said, "that you were going to leave anyway. He said it like it was useful information." "Was it?" He thought about this honestly. "No," he said. "I already knew." She turned to look at him. The streetlights moved across her face at intervals as the car moved. Light, dark, the specific rhythm of a city at speed. "You knew." "I knew something was wrong. I told myself I didn't know specifically. That's different from not knowing." He looked at his hands in his lap. The stitched arm was stiff, and the stiffness was spreading into the shoulder, which the doctor had told him would happen, and which he had not paid significant attention to at the time. "I'm very good at telling myself things that make it possible to continue doing what I'm doing. I've been doing it for a long time. It's a useful skill in my line of work, and a very destructive one in everything else." Zuri looked at him for a long moment. She didn't say anything. She turned back to the window. "I'm not forgiving you tonight," she said. Not harshly, just clearly. "I need you to understand that. Tonight is its own thing, and I'm grateful to be in this car, and I'm grateful that she's okay, and She stopped. Her hand went to her stomach, not the pressed flat desperate gesture of the last 6 hours, but the settled ordinary gesture of a woman acknowledging a presence. "I'm grateful for all of it. But gratitude and forgiveness are not the same thing, and I'm not going to confuse them because it's 4:30 in the morning and I'm exhausted." "I know," he said, "you don't get to come home tonight." "I know. I'm going to the hospital and they're going to check everything they need to check, and then I'm going to sleep for as long as I can sleep. And when I wake up, I'm going to start figuring out what I actually want. Not what the situation requires. What I want." "Yes," he said. "And you're going to—" She paused again. "What are you going to do?" He thought about the morning, the legal filings for Min Seok's arraignment, the conversation with Cho, the meeting with Dae-sung that was not a formal meeting, the corruption inside his organization that had allowed 2 informants to operate inside it for months, which was not a single failure but a systemic one, the kind that requires not just the removal of the individuals, but an honest examination of the conditions that made their operation possible. He thought about the business, which would need to be restructured in ways he had been avoiding for years, because the restructuring required admitting that some of what he had been built on expedience rather than principle, and admitting that required being willing to dismantle parts of it, and dismantling parts of it required accepting that some of the power he had accumulated would not survive the dismantling. He had known this for years. He had been not knowing it in the expert way he not knew things. "I'm going to start taking apart the parts of what I do that allowed tonight to happen," he said. "Not just the traitors. The structure that made it easy for them to do what they did. That's going to take a long time, and it's going to cost me things I'm accustomed to having." She was quiet. "And I'm going to figure out," he said, "how to be present to what is actually happening in my own life, rather than the version of it I've been managing from a distance. I don't know what that looks like yet. I know I've been very bad at it." June pulled the car up to the hospital entrance. Zuri didn't move immediately. She sat with her hand on her stomach and looked at the hospital entrance, and then looked at Ji-hoon one more time with that direct, layered quality of looking. "You could have died tonight," she said. "Yes." "On that boat. The knife." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Were you scared? He thought about the 4 feet, the knife, the wet deck. No, he said. That's not the kind of thing that scares me. The thing that scared me was the room, the empty room. When I came through the door and she wasn't there. Her eyes stayed on him. That was the first time I've been scared of something in a very long time, he said. I had forgotten what it felt like to be scared of losing something rather than scared of losing a situation. She looked at him for another moment. Then she opened the car door. She stopped with one foot on the ground and said, without turning, "Don't send flowers." He said, "All right. You can come in the morning if you want. I'm not promising anything, but you can come." She got out of the car and walked to the hospital entrance without looking back, which was Zuri's established mode of going through doors, and had been for as long as he'd known her. Ji-hoon watched the entrance doors close behind her. He sat in the empty back seat for a moment. The car was idling. June was not looking at the rearview mirror, which was a form of professional respect that Ji-hoon had always appreciated about him. "Sir," June said. "Drive," Ji-hoon said. The office felt different at 5:30 in the morning. It was the same office, same walnut desk, same window, same city on the other side of the glass. But the night had changed the person sitting in front of it, and a room always feels different to a different person, even if that person carries the same name and the same face. Ji-hoon sat behind the desk and looked at what the night had produced. Min Seok in custody. His network dismantled. Not completely. Organizations don't dismantle overnight, but the operational infrastructure was gone. The key personnel were either arrested or scattered, and the financial architecture that had sustained it would be exposed in the legal proceedings to follow. 7 years of patient construction, and the night had taken most of it. Dae-sung's daughter, retrieved. Dae-sung himself in a room somewhere with her right now, and Ji-hoon did not allow himself to imagine that scene because imagining it would require a kind of emotional engagement. He was not yet able to manage cleanly, and he needed to be clean for the morning. Cho, in the storage room, waiting. Ji-hoon picked up the phone and called the legal team's senior partner, a man named Kwon, who had been handling the organization's formal legal needs for 11 years and had the specific quality of a lawyer who understands that his clients exist in a complicated relationship with the law and has made his peace with that complication. "I need 2 things," Ji-hoon said. "First, the Min Seok filing. I want it airtight, and I want it filed when the courthouse opens. No gaps. No opportunities for a competent defense to find procedural footholds. Everything the team gathered tonight goes through you before anything is disposed of or repositioned." Kwon said something. "The second thing," Ji-hoon said, "is a separate matter. I need you to begin an audit of the organization's operational structure, a real audit. Not the kind designed to confirm that everything is acceptable, the kind designed to find what isn't. I'll give you full access, accounts, communications, personnel files, everything. I want to know what's actually there." A longer pause from Kwon. "I understand that this is unusual," Ji-hoon said. "Do it anyway." He hung up. He opened the desk drawer and took out the second photograph, the one June had printed from the gate footage, Zuri at the gate in the rain, her hand pressed against her stomach. He looked at it, and then he put it face down on the desk. Not because he didn't want to look at it, but because looking at it right now was the kind of thing that needed to happen in a different kind of moment than this one. This was the moment for work. The other moment would come. He picked up the phone again and called Sung-il. "Ha-yeon," he said. "Is she with her father?" Sung-il's voice was careful. "Yes, sir. She's—" A pause. It took him a while to let go of her. Ji-hoon looked at the window. "Good," he said. "Tell Dae-sung I'll see him at 2. He hung up and sat with the silence of the office and the city outside it, which was beginning its transition. The quality of the light changing by increments too small to see individually, but accumulating toward morning, the way things accumulate toward whatever they are becoming. At 7 in the morning, Ji-hoon went to the storage room where Cho Byung-soo had spent the night. Cho was awake. He had been awake for most of the night, probably. The particular look of a man who has not slept is specific and not performable. The eyes too dry, the stillness too complete, the way they move when you enter a room slightly too controlled, managing the looking. Ji-hoon sat across from him. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at Cho the way he'd looked at the gate footage, For information, not for confirmation of what he already thought he knew. Cho said, "Is she safe?" "Yes," Ji-hoon said. Something in Cho's body changed, not dramatically, a small release, the specific physical event of attention that has been held for a long time being reduced by a single piece of information. "What did he offer you?" Ji-hoon said. Cho looked at the floor. His hands were on his knees. He had the particular posture of a man who has been sitting in a room alone for several hours, constructing the version of the next conversation that he can live with. "Nothing," Cho said. Ji-hoon waited. "He didn't offer me anything," Cho said. I need you to understand that. He didn't come to me with money or threat. He came to me with..." He stopped. He looked at the wall instead of the floor. "He came to me with what he knew about you, what your father did to his. He sat with me for 2 hours, and he talked about what it felt like to watch everything disappear. And he asked me if I thought there was anyone in your organization who actually understood what you cost people, not your enemies, people who worked for you." Ji-hoon said nothing. "I've worked for you for 5 years," Cho said, "and His jaw moved. "He was right about some of it. That's the part I've been sitting with all night. He was right about some of it, the way you operate, the cost of it, the way things get arranged, and people absorb those arrangements, and no one talks about what it costs." The room was quiet. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me," Cho said. "I know what I did. I know what could have happened to her because of what I did." His voice thinned on the last sentence. "I know." Ji-hoon looked at him for a long time. What Cho had given Min Seok was operational intelligence, Ji-hoon's movements, scheduling, team composition. Not Zuri's schedule, which had been Dae-sung's contribution. Not the clinic, which had also been Dae-sung. Cho's information had been organizational, useful to Min Seok's planning, but not the specific thing that had put Zuri on that highway on that night. The responsibility was real. It was not the same as Dae-sung's, and it was not the same as Min Seok's. It was its own specific weight. "You're out," Ji-hoon said. "Not harmed, not handed to anyone. Out. You'll be paid through the end of the month, and then the relationship is over. You'll sign a specific agreement through Kwon's office, and you'll honor it." He paused. "And you're going to think seriously about what Min Seok told you for 2 hours. Not as a justification for what you did, as information about the kind of organization you want to spend your life working for. Because I'm going to think about it too." Cho looked at him. The looking had surprise in it. Not performed surprise, but the real disoriented kind. "Go home," Ji-hoon said. The meeting with Dae-sung was at 2 in the afternoon, in a room that was not the formal meeting room and not Ji-hoon's office. It was a smaller room, a room with a table and chairs and nothing else. A room that didn't carry the architecture of hierarchy. Dae-sung came in and sat down and looked at Ji-hoon with the eyes of a man who had slept for 3 hours and held his daughter for all the rest of the time since she'd been returned to him, and who was now sitting across from the man he had betrayed and carrying the weight of both those facts simultaneously. "She asked me if I'd been scared," Dae-sung said. Before Ji-hoon had said anything, he said it like a man who had been turning it over all morning. "Ha-eun, she asked me if I'd been scared while she was gone." Ji-hoon waited. "I told her yes," Dae-sung said. "She said she'd been scared too, but she counted things to make herself feel better. She said counting made it feel like time was still moving." He stopped. His hands were flat on the table. "She's 9 years old." "I know," Ji-hoon said. "I can't justify what I did to you," Dae-sung said. "I spent the night trying to build a version of it I could justify, and I couldn't. Everything I gave him had a cost. I knew the cost when I gave it. I told myself it was contained, that it wouldn't go where it went." He looked at Ji-hoon directly. "I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong, and I did it anyway, because she is 9 years old, and she is mine, and I would do it again. I need you to know that. I would do it again." The room was quiet. Ji-hoon looked at the man across from him. 13 years. The car in Busan. Every room. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking to stay," Dae-sung said. "I'm not asking for anything. He stopped again. His jaw was working. "I needed you to know that I didn't do it easily. And I needed you to know that I understand what it cost." Ji-hoon looked at the table between them. He thought about what Cho had said in the storage room. He was right about some of it. And he thought about Min Seok on the canal. You just arranged things, very carefully, very cleanly, and then you had dinner. And he thought about Zuri at the gate in the rain, with her hand pressed flat against her stomach. You're not staying in the organization, Ji-hoon said. That's not possible. You know that. Yes. But you're not an enemy, and Ha-yoon is not going to spend her life in the shadow of this if I have anything to say about it. She's 9. She counted things to make herself feel better. He paused. There will be a financial arrangement. Through Kwan. Not charity. A settlement for the years of service and for what those years cost you. Enough for her to grow up without this being the defining thing. Daesung looked at him. His eyes were full in the way eyes get when a person is in the presence of something they didn't expect and don't know how to receive. Ji-hoon, don't, Ji-hoon said. Not harshly, just specifically. You don't need to say anything else, neither do I. We've known each other for 13 years and we both know what the last 4 months cost and what it cost before that, and I don't think another conversation is going to add to what we already know. He stood up. Take her somewhere good for a few days, somewhere with a beach. Kids like beaches. Daesung stood. He stood the way men stand when they are carrying too much to have good posture about it. He looked at Ji-hoon one more time, and then he nodded once and walked out. Ji-hoon stood in the empty room for a moment after the door closed. He thought about 13 years. He thought about how long it takes to know a person, and how little of that knowing you can actually access in the moment when it would be most useful. He thought about the fact that he had built an organization in which a man felt that betrayal was preferable to asking for help, and he thought about what that said about the organization and what it said about the man who built it. He picked up his phone and looked at it. No missed calls from the hospital. He had not expected any. Zuri had said morning, not a specific time, and she would not call before she was ready. He went back to his office. He sat at the desk and he pulled out the photograph. The gate photograph, Zuri in the rain, and he put it face up this time and he looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. So, he arrived at the hospital at 11 the next morning. He had not sent flowers. He brought nothing, which was itself a choice. Not the choice he would have made a year ago, which would have been something curated and expensive and communicative of effort, but a choice that felt more accurate to what the morning actually was, which was not a performance of remorse but an attempt at something simpler and harder. Zuri's room was on the 4th floor. The nurse at the desk looked at him with a professional neutrality that suggested she had been told he might come and had not been given a specific instruction about what to do when he did. He knocked on the door. Come in, Zuri said. She was sitting up in the bed. She had slept. He could see it in the quality of her face, the way rest settles a person into themselves differently than exhaustion does. She was in a hospital gown and she had her own sweater over it, which meant someone had brought her things, which meant she had called someone, which meant she had a life outside the last 12 hours that had continued operating on its own logic. He sat in the chair beside the bed, the patient's chair, not the accompanying one. He sat in it because it was the chair available. She looked at him, at his face, at the jaw where Min Seok's elbow had connected and which had moved through the night from pain into a visible bruise, purple-yellow at the edge of his jawline. At his left arm, which was in the sleeve of a clean jacket, but which he was holding slightly differently from the way he usually held it. You slept, she said. A few hours. Your face looks terrible. I know. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached to the bedside table and picked up the folder there, a manila folder, thin, from the hospital. She opened it and took out a photograph and held it toward him. A new ultrasound image. Clearer than the one from 14 days ago. The hospital had done a full scan that morning, she said. Everything was exactly as it should be. He took the image. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the one from the night before, carefully, with the specific attention he gave to things he intended to actually see rather than just observe. The shape was clearer now, the particular completeness of something that was both very small and entirely itself. The doctor said she's perfect, Zuri said. He looked up. She. A pause. I asked them not to tell me. I keep saying she. He looked at the image. She, he said. It felt like the right shape in his mouth. He didn't analyze that. He put the image down on the bed between them. He looked at his hands, the stitched arm, the bruised jaw, the clean jacket over all of it, which was a kind of honesty about the fact that he was still the person who wore clean jackets over difficult things, who probably always would be, who was capable of acknowledging this now as a characteristic rather than a virtue. "I want to say something," he said. She waited. "I'm not going to say I'm sorry," he said, "because I am, but sorry isn't. Sorry is the beginning of a thing, not the thing itself. And I've been saying sorry in the way people say sorry when they don't intend to change anything, and I don't want to be the person who does that anymore." She was very still. "I was absent for 4 years," he said. "Not physically. I was there. I was present in the room and at the table and in the bed. But the version of me that was present was the version I manage, the version that functions and makes decisions and keeps the operation of everything moving. And that version is not—" He stopped. He found the words. "That version doesn't know what it means to be afraid of losing you. It knows how to operate in the event of losing you. That's different. And I spent 4 years giving you the version that operates instead of the version that is afraid, and you deserve the one that is afraid." The room was quiet. A sound from somewhere in the hallway, a cart, a door, the ordinary sounds of a hospital conducting its ordinary business. Zuri looked at him. "I'm not moving back into the house," she said. "I know. I want my own space while I figure out what I actually want. That's not a bargaining position. It's what I need." "Yes." "And the business," she said. "Whatever you're doing with it, the audit, the restructuring, whatever June mentioned when he called this morning to check on me." She paused. "I don't need you to become someone different. I don't want that. I don't need you to stop being who you are. I need you to stop using who you are as a reason for being absent." He looked at her. "That's going to be harder than the audit." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for easy." Something crossed his face that was not a smile exactly, but in the neighborhood of one, the involuntary registration of a person being seen accurately by someone who knows them. He picked up the ultrasound image. He held it for a moment, this new one, the clearer one, the one that had been produced by a morning in a hospital that had come after the longest night of both their lives. "Can I come back?" he said. "Not to the house. Here. Tomorrow." Zuri looked at the window. The Seoul sky was gray and ordinary, the kind of sky a city produces when the weather has nothing particular to announce, just the continuation of the day. "Yes," she said. He put the image down on the bedside table. He stood up. He straightened his jacket in the way he straightened his jacket, which was the same as it had always been and probably always would be. The small, insistent habits of a person that survive everything else. He looked at her. She looked at him. The 4 years were there in the room. The night was there. The canal and the boat, and the 14 stitches, and the 163 beats per minute. Daesung and Ha-Yun and Cho and Min Seok and the woman in the red dress and the guard who had laughed with the corners of his mouth. All of it in the room, all of it accounted for, not resolved in the way that resolutions make things neat, but processed in the way that real things get processed. Incompletely, honestly, with the full knowledge that what comes next will not be easier than what came before, only different. He moved toward the door. "Ji-hoon," she said. He stopped. "The gate," she said. "When you read the report, when you saw the footage, the guard who laughed." He turned slightly. He waited. "Don't do anything to him," she said. "That's not—" She paused. "He was doing what he was told. Let it go." He looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. He went to the door. He put his hand on it. "I would have left," she said. One more time. Quietly. Not as an accusation, as a statement of the true thing. "I want you to know that. I was really going to go." "I know," he said. "I know you were." He opened the door. The hallway was ordinary. Fluorescent lights, linoleum, a nurse at the far end who wasn't paying attention to him. The ordinary infrastructure of a place designed to receive people in the worst and best moments of their lives and continue functioning regardless. He walked down the hallway. He went to the elevator and pressed the button and waited, and the elevator came and he got in and the doors closed, and he looked at his own reflection in the brushed metal of the elevator doors, jacket, jaw, the left arm held slightly differently, and he thought about what Zuri had asked him in the car. Who are you going to be? The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the hospital lobby, which was full of people conducting the ordinary morning business of a hospital. Waiting, filling out forms, carrying coffee, carrying flowers, carrying the specific compressed weight of people who are moving through a difficult chapter of their life, and are doing it in a building full of strangers doing the same. Ji-hoon walked through the lobby. He walked out the front entrance into the gray Seoul morning, and the air outside was cold and ordinary, and it smelled like the city, which smelled like coffee and exhaust, and the particular mineral quality of pavement after rain. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He was not making a plan. He was not building a strategy. He was not managing anything. He was standing on a sidewalk outside a hospital in the gray morning, in a city that was moving around him without caring about any of what had happened in the last 12 hours. And he was thinking about a woman on the 4th floor who was looking at an ultrasound image and saying she in her own mind because that was what felt right. He started walking, not toward anything specific, not away from anything specific, just walking in the gray morning with the city around him, which was what you did when you didn't have a destination yet but had decided to move, which was perhaps the only honest position available at the beginning of a thing you didn't know how to do but had decided to begin. The city moved around him. Somewhere behind him, on the 4th floor, Zuri was holding the ultrasound image with one hand flat on her stomach, the way she always held it, not with the desperate pressure of someone protecting something, but with the settled, ordinary weight of a woman who knows what she's carrying and has decided to carry it forward. The light at the corner changed. Ji-hoon crossed the street, and the morning continued, ordinary and gray and full of the city's indifferent ongoing life, which didn't slow for anyone and didn't need to, because life doesn't slow. It just continues, and the only question it ever asks is whether you're moving with it or standing still. And after the longest night of his life, Kang Ji-hoon was finally, imperfectly, honestly moving.